Imagine opening your eyes to a new day and suddenly realizing that what you called identity was never truly yours. The way you think, the feelings you carry, the fears that paralyze you, all of it shaped by voices that aren't yours. Subtle, silent, but incredibly powerful voices that have woven the thread of your existence as if you were a puppet. Carl Gustav Jung, a renowned Swiss psychiatrist, warned us about this great illusion. For him, most people do not live as genuine individuals, but rather as shadows cast by a larger system, a system that begins to shape us from the moment we first breathe. We are taught from an early age to fit in, to obey rules, to follow standards, to seek acceptance. We have been given a name, a nationality, a culture, and a code of values. And without realizing it, we end up confusing all this with our real essence. But there is an uncomfortable truth. If you have never stopped to reflect on these conditionings, you may never have experienced true freedom. Jung developed a revolutionary idea, individuation. It is a deep dive into the soul, an inner path that leads to the birth of the true being. A process through which we become who we really are, free from the invisible shackles that manipulate our mind. However, this path does not begin without a shock. Something needs to wake us up, something to shake us. It is only when we feel the discomfort of prison that we begin to look for the way out. In this article, we'll explore how external and internal forces operate silently to shape our behavior, influence our choices, and ultimately prevent us from living authentically. But the focus is not just on understanding the problem. The real goal is to understand how individuation can free us from all of this. Because once you are awake, nothing and no one will be able to control you again. Have you ever caught yourself doing something and then wondering, was this really my decision? Perhaps it felt as if it were being carried by an invisible current, pushed to act in a certain way. This is not imagination. Jung discovered that much of what we do does not come from our conscious mind. It comes from something much deeper, the collective unconscious. This collective unconscious functions as an ancestral repository. In it live archetypes, universal models of behavior that manifest themselves in all cultures and times. Hero, villain, mother, sage, victim. These are patterns that influence how we see the world and position ourselves in it. When you act, think, or feel, you're often not just being you. You are living an old script, written by invisible hands even before you were born. Society defines what is right and what is wrong. It determines what is success, what is failure, what is admirable, and what should be avoided. These definitions do not come from your heart, but from collective norms. They shape your desires, your goals, and even your fears. And the more you strive to meet these external demands, the more you distance yourself from your inner truth. Jung also told us about the persona, the social mask we use to be accepted. From an early age, we learn that certain attitudes earn praise, while others bring punishment. Little by little, we adjust ourselves to please parents, teachers, colleagues, bosses. And so, we create a version of ourselves that is palatable, that fits. But the stronger this persona becomes, the weaker our true selves become. This mask can be so well constructed that we begin to believe that it is all that we are. If your persona is that of someone who is docile and always willing to help, you may have a hard time expressing anger or saying no. He can end up becoming an emotional puppet, hostage to the will of others. Behind this facade that we show the world, there is a part of us that we hide, the shadow. It is the hidden territory of the soul, where desires, impulses, and thoughts that we have learned to reject are stored. But the curious thing is that the more we try to ignore the shadow, the more it gains power over us. When we feel exaggerated anger towards someone, for example, we are often projecting something onto the other that we do not accept in ourselves. When we envy or idolize someone, it may be that they represent a part of us that has been suppressed. And as long as we don't recognize these projections, we will be controlled by them in subtle but devastating ways. Therefore, we have here three mechanisms that bind us in invisible chains: the collective unconscious, which dictates our social roles; the persona, which teaches us to hide who we are in order to be accepted; and the shadow, which gathers everything we deny in ourselves and manipulates us from the inside out. However, there is still a fourth element, perhaps the most dangerous, that acts as the jailer of our freedom: society itself. Jung saw the process of individuation as a liberation, but to free himself from what exactly? The answer is unsettling: to free oneself from the unconscious domination exercised by the social norms that we internalize from the cradle. From the moment we are born, we are pushed into a system that already has everything ready for us. What is normal, what is desirable, what it is to live a good life. These ideas are handed to us as absolute truths. And so, many spend their entire lives pursuing goals that, deep down, they never wanted: a prestigious career, a perfect relationship, an impeccable image on social networks. These ambitions often don't come from the heart. They're reflections of a collective desire, not an authentic will. When we follow these expectations without question, we disconnect from our innermost core. We became prisoners in gilded cells, smiling as we got lost. The more we follow imposed standards without reflecting, the more we believe we are choosing on our own. But, as Carl Jung rightly said, as long as you don't become aware of yourself, the unconscious will continue to guide your life, and you'll call it destiny. This is one of the most painful truths to face. What we think of as self-will is often just a repetition of conditioning. Culture works like an invisible tide, constantly pushing us towards what it considers right. The greater danger is that we rarely realize that we are being taken. This is because the human being, by essence, is a social being. In ancient times, being rejected by the group meant isolation, which could result in death itself. Today, the risks have changed, but the impulse to fit in remains firm, etched in our deepest memories. How many times have you silenced a sincere opinion to avoid conflict? How many times have you molded yourself to be accepted? This unconscious desire for social approval is one of the most effective control tools out there. We are encouraged to go with the flow, to repeat patterns, to wear masks. And social networks amplify all this. Instead of showing who we really are, we started to display an edited, calculated version, fabricated to attract likes and compliments. But who are you when there's no one watching? That's the question that really matters. Jung realized that true freedom can only be won when you detach yourself from these social forces that operate below the surface of consciousness. But why, after all, do we allow ourselves to be dominated so easily? Why do we accept, without resistance, chains that imprison us? The answer lies in our inner ground. We are dominated from the outside because, inside us, there is fertile soil for this domination to happen. Insecurities, emotional wounds, traumas, limiting beliefs, all of these form a favorable field for control. One of the most powerful reasons we allow ourselves to be manipulated is the desperate search for validation. This manifests itself as a constant feeling of inadequacy, the belief that we are not enough, that we are not up to what is expected of us. This inferiority complex is usually born in childhood when we seek to please authority figures, parents, teachers, caregivers. As adults, this need is transformed. We want the approval of colleagues, partners, leaders, and even strangers on the internet. This standard is so strong that we come to believe that we will only be worthy of love and respect if we are within socially accepted molds. And while we seek recognition outside of ourselves, we are vulnerable to any discourse that promises us exactly what we think we lack. Jung warned us, whoever does not face his own shadow will be enslaved by it. When you depend on the gaze of others to feel whole, any criticism or rejection can destabilize you. And it is precisely this emotional fragility that makes external control possible. Another important factor is unresolved traumas. Painful experiences from the past create invisible scars that lodge in the depths of the mind. These marks turn into unconscious beliefs that limit our sense of worthiness. For example, someone who was rejected in childhood may grow up believing that they are not worthy of love. This often silent belief makes him more likely to accept situations and relationships that promise security, even if they cost him his freedom. When we submit too long to these forces, something dangerous happens: psychological conformism. More than following social rules, it is a state of mind where we absorb external expectations as if they were our own. And the most alarming thing is that this happens without us realizing it. The mind tries to avoid pain and discomfort at all costs. Therefore, confronting society, challenging standards, facing trauma, all this seems threatening. It's much easier to just follow the finished script, believing that we are what others say we should be. But this comfort is a trap. By avoiding confrontation with the truth itself, we stop knowing ourselves. We lost the chance to live fully. Jung said, "What you reject dominates you. What you accept is transformed." Denying your emotions, ignoring your flaws, suppressing your impulses doesn't make them go away. On the contrary, these parts of you become stronger, operating in the shadows, controlling your attitudes without you realizing it. It takes courage to stop running away from yourself. And when we finally become aware of this, a new stage begins. The search for freedom. But this freedom is neither easy nor immediate. It requires inner work, a willingness to review beliefs, the strength to face parts of ourselves that we would prefer to keep hidden. The process of individuation described by Jung is just that, a path of integration. It is not about becoming different, but about becoming complete. It means welcoming all the parts that make us up, including those that scare or embarrass us. Integrate the shadow, break with the persona, understand the archetypes that guide us. For this, courage is needed. Courage to dive into yourself, courage to recognize that much of what we think is true is, in reality, an external construction. Courage to start treading a new, lonely path, often misunderstood by those around us. Comfortable illusions will need to die. Masks will fall. Bonds based on convenience and control may break. But at the end of this crossing, you will find something that no illusion can offer: authenticity. And when you become whole, nothing and no one can manipulate you anymore. By embarking on the process of individuation, you begin a journey that few have the courage to make. This path is undoubtedly fraught with challenges, both internal and external. It requires breaking with the ideas that have always been given to us. It requires courage to face uncomfortable truths. It is like dismantling a house built on fragile foundations and then building a solid home within itself. But why is this so difficult? Because it requires facing what is hidden. Because it forces you to abandon certainties that previously gave you a false sense of security. Because, above all, it asks you to stop being what others want, to become who you really are. The confrontation with the shadow is one of the most intense steps in this journey. It is necessary to look into the eyes of anger, envy, vanity, pride. Recognize that all these feelings are part of you, even if society has taught you to hide them. Integrating the shadow does not mean surrendering to it, but rather accepting it as part of your wholeness. And only then do you stop being controlled by what you pretend doesn't exist. Carl Jung insisted, "What is not conscious becomes destiny." If you do not illuminate your own abysses, you will be dragged through them. Therefore, self-knowledge is not just a choice. It is a vital need for those who want to live authentically and freely. Another crucial element in this trajectory is the deconstruction of the persona. It is painful to realize that many of our attitudes did not come from the soul, but from the attempt to please, to be accepted, to fit in. The persona is useful, yes, we need it to interact with the world, but the problem arises when we believe that it is all that we are. Removing this mask, layer by layer, can cause existential crises. It can generate fear, guilt, confusion. But it also makes room for something that has never taken place before: the true self. During this process, it is common to feel isolated. Individuation requires distancing. Not because you want to be alone, but because you start to realize that many of the relationships and conversations around you revolve around superficialities. Suddenly, what once made sense no longer resonates. You feel different, and it is. Jung said that loneliness is not the result of the absence of people, but of the impossibility of sharing what really matters with them. When you wake up, you start to see the world with different eyes. And these eyes often see the void where there was once illusion. Therefore, the journey of self-knowledge requires not only introspection, but also detachment. You can lose friends, push family members away, break away from environments in which you once felt comfortable. But not because these people or places are bad, but because their growth forces others to confront what they themselves avoid within themselves. The awakening of an authentic individual is uncomfortable. It breaks a silent pact of conformity, and therefore it will often be seen as a threat. Many will try to pull you back to the old place, so that everything will go back to the way it was before. Not out of malice, but because their example forces them to look inward, and not everyone is ready for it. Joseph Campbell, heavily influenced by Jung's studies, described this path as the hero's journey. A trajectory where the hero leaves the comfort zone, faces symbolic monsters, which are nothing more than his own fears and traumas, and returns transformed, with a new meaning for life. That hero, in fact, is you. It is each one of us. We are called to leave behind the known, to confront our own demons, and to emerge on the other side as wholer, more lucid, truer versions of ourselves. But make no mistake, this journey is not glamorous. The hero also feels fear. It also falls. It is also questioned. The difference is that he continues, despite everything, because he understands that the price of inner freedom is the death of illusion. Along this journey, you will realize that you no longer need the approval that once seemed essential. You will notice that the opinions of others no longer have the same weight. You'll understand that true strength is born of inner silence, that place inside you that always knew who you were, even when the world tried to convince you otherwise. And what is gained at the end of this process? The answer is simple and, at the same time, profound: you win yourself. There is no greater achievement than this. When you become whole, there is no more room for manipulation. There are no more loopholes for fear to decide for you. There are no more invisible ropes leading your steps. You become the author of your own story. Jung dedicated his life to unraveling these mysteries of the human psyche because he understood how urgent and necessary it is for each of us to reconnect with our essence. He did not see the process of individuation as a luxury reserved for the few, but as a universal mission, a crossing that everyone, sooner or later, will have to face. You now understand that the freedom you seek is not in material achievements, nor in the perfect image you try to build. It is not in the validation of others, nor in trying to fit into molds that were not made for you. Real freedom begins the moment you look inside honestly, face what you find, and decide not to run away. It starts when you allow yourself to be who you are, with flaws, fears, desires, lights, and shadows. It starts when you stop asking yourself who you should be and start to discover, with courage, who you really are. This awakening requires sacrifice. It requires courage. It requires persistence. But it also offers something that nothing external can ever give: authenticity. As Carl Jung said, those who look outside only dream, but who looks inside awakens. And when you awaken, no one and nothing can control you again, because you will no longer be a reflection of the world. You will be a complete being, conscious, whole, free. Now, the choice is before you: stay asleep, comfortable in the script they wrote for you, or start the journey that will lead to finding your truth. And then tell me, are you ready to become who you really are?